When most people picture the Wild West, they think of cowboys and outlaws. But behind many of those stories were remarkable women whose lives were just as daring. So we are taking you across Central Texas to discover the women who challenged convention, built businesses, solved mysteries, and left behind legends that still echo today. Welcome to the Women of the Weird Wild West.
We are starting with a woman who ruled Waco's Wild West nights. Her name was Madam Molly Adams, and before Waco was known for churches and colleges, Molly Adams ran one of the most powerful and perfectly legal businesses in town. So in the late 1800s, Waco was a booming frontier city nicknamed Six-Shooter Junction, packed with cowboys, cattle money, and gamblers looking for trouble. And in 1889, the city made history legalizing prostitution in a fenced-off red light district known as the Reservation, making Waco the first city in Texas and the second in the nation to do so. Well, that's where Molly Adams made her mark. She started out working in a small brothel around 1890, but within a few years, she climbed the ranks, running a 7-room house inside the reservation. So by 1910, Molly Adams was rich and living large in a home complete with electricity, indoor plumbing, and plush red velvet chairs, fit for a frontier queen. But in 1917, with World War I underway in Camp MacArthur nearby, city leaders shut the reservation down, and Molly Adams, who was once one of the richest women in town, well, she died penniless in 1940 and is buried in Oakwood Cemetery. We're taking you to Belton, where a group of women in the late 1800s broke all society's rules and built a community of their own. So they called themselves the Sanctified Sisters, a woman-only religious commune led by this lady, Martha McWhirter. And that home that you just saw there, that is where she lived. Here it is here. And it's still standing on North Pearl Street in Belton. So after claiming a spiritual sanctification, she gathered women, many escaping abusive marriages, and they created a community based on prayer, celibacy, and complete independence in a time when women couldn't even vote or even own much property. So these sisters, they ran successful businesses from a busy boarding house to the Central Hotel near the railroad. They even helped launch Belton's very first public library. But of course, their success came with some controversy. Neighbors called them odd, and some called them homewreckers. The Sanctified Sisters stood their ground, though, proving that women could thrive on the frontier without a husband, a church, or society's approval. They eventually moved to Washington, D.C., but their legacy still lives on today in Belton. A lot going on here, a whole lot. So a lot of people, some historians, and they say that these women were definitely ahead of their time, because the women's movement didn't come until later, in the 1920s in America, but they were way ahead of their time. This kind of fizzled out and died out. I think they said the last woman from this community died in 1980 or something like that, and after she died, there were no more. We are taking you to Salado, where the toughest lawmen didn't carry badges. They carried knitting needles. So let's roll it back to 1882, when word spread that this building was turning into a saloon. Well, the men were okay with it, but the women said absolutely not, fearing the moral, cultural, and religious downfall of Salado. So the ladies hatched a plan so polite, it was diabolical. 2 at a time, every day, they parked themselves in front of the saloon doors, knitting calmly, no yelling, no signs, just needles clicking and judgment hanging in the air. The results? Well, no drinking happened, and the men, they rarely visited the saloon. So the owner packed up and moved to Holland, and out of spite, named his new bar the Salado Saloon. So remember, in the weird Wild West of Salado, the most powerful weapon wasn't a 6-shooter. It was yarn. So kind of doing some research, I'm like, really? It really happened? But I guess the men didn't want to put up with the ladies, so they were like, oh, we're going to skip that saloon. I don't feel like, being bothered by them ladies, sitting there knitting and judging me, so they went elsewhere, and that's why the owner never got customers. So It worked. As many of you are settling in this weekend for the latest season of Bridgerton and Lady Whistledown's Society Papers, I want to remind you that Waco had its own version long before streaming ever existed. The Artesia newspaper was Waco's original gossip queen, keeping tabs on high society, social calls, and who was doing what and with whom. So while other papers chased crime and politics, the Artesia chased something far more dangerous. Who was seen visiting who, and who needed to mind their own business. So running strong from 1892 to 1901, the Artesia had a circulation of 2,500, which meant if you sneezed in Waco, there was a good chance it showed up in print by Sunday. Its most popular feature, a society roundup politely titled Movements of People You Know, which was really code for We Saw You. Tea parties, weekend guests, club meetings, wedding picnics. If you showed up in town, the Artesia took notes. Founded by a man named Isaac Goldstein and steered by editor Kate Friend, the paper mixed culture with curiosity. One week it was arts and music, the next it was whose parlor hosted the latest gathering. No saloon brawls required, reputations were made or ruined in black ink. So before there were group texts, before there were gossip blogs or social media feeds, Waco had the Artesia, the original rumor mill of the Wild West. And trust me, everybody was reading it.
We are tipping our hats to a woman who didn't just break glass ceilings, she pinned a badge right through them. So meet Sheriff Sarah White, the first and only woman to serve as sheriff of Milam County, Texas. Her husband, Walter White, was elected sheriff in November of 1942 and served until January 1943 when he went into the military service during World War II. Well, Sarah was appointed to complete his term, and she stayed in the office until January 1 of 1945, becoming the fourth woman in the state of Texas to hold the title of county sheriff. So locals remembered Sheriff White as firm, fair, and fearless. She wore her badge pinned to her dress and carried a pistol in her purse and answered calls right alongside her deputies. She also cooked meals for the inmates at the county jail. In a time when few women held public office, Sheriff Sarah White stood tall in a man's world, proving you didn't need spurs and a Stetson to keep law and order in Texas. So this Women's History Month, remember, sometimes the Wild West wasn't tamed by cowboys. It was run by a woman with a badge on her dress and a pistol in her purse.
This story proves you can take the girl out of Texas, but you can't take Texas out of the girl. So her name was Mary Louise Cecilia Guinan, but the world knew her as Texas Guinan. Born in 1884 in Waco, she grew up a little mischievous. She pulled pranks on local shop owners and learned to rope and ride like a true cowgirl. Well, those skills landed her in Wild West shows and silent Western films in Hollywood. She played tough heroines who could handle a pistol just as well as any cowboy. But her biggest act came in Prohibition-era New York City. That is when the Waco cowgirl reinvented herself as the queen of speakeasies. She ran some of the city's most famous underground nightclubs. Her signature greetings to customers was, quote, "Hello, sucker," and somehow people loved it. Well, if authorities shut down one club, well, Texas Guinan simply opened another down the street. So when she died in 1933, nearly 12,000 people showed up to her Broadway memorial. That's not bad for a mischievous cowgirl from Waco who turned Texas grit into big city fame.
We're going to take you to Belton, where a young girl's rough start in life helped create one of the most unusual nicknames in Old West history. Her name was Mary Elizabeth Libby Haley Thompson. But most folks knew her by a nickname that was hard to forget, Squirrel Tooth Alice. Well, she was born in 1855 to a once wealthy family in Belton, but the Civil War wiped out the family's fortune and tragedy soon followed. When Libby was 9, Comanche raiders attacked the family's farm and took her captive. It was 3 years before her parents finally paid a ransom to bring her home. But life back in Belton wasn't the same. She began seeing an older man, and her father was so outraged by the relationship that he shot and killed the suitor on the front porch. So at just 14 years old, she ran away and eventually made her way to Kansas. She became a dance hall girl and prostitute and married a cowboy named Texas Billy Thompson. So one night, someone noticed the gap in her front teeth, and the nickname Squirrel Tooth Alice was born. So she embraced that name and eventually built a life running a brothel in Sweetwater, Texas. So the girl who once felt she had no place in Belton ended up becoming one of the most unforgettable characters of the Texas frontier.
So I'm taking you to Mahia, where a fortune teller may have predicted one of the biggest oil booms in Texas history. Well, before the drills, before the gushers, there was Annie Buchanan West, born in 1892. So legend says a man named Colonel A.E. Humphreys came to her looking for answers, and Annie told him exactly where to drill. And just like that, boom, it was the start of the Mahia oil boom of the 1920s. Now get this, Annie charged $2 for a reading, but that oil advice, it reportedly earned her $8,500, which was a lot of money back in the 1920s. But Annie wasn't just about predictions. She gave back too, helping fund churches across Central Texas and building a legacy that went far beyond fortune telling. So sure, some folks, they didn't believe her. Some even tried to fine her for it. But others, they swore by her gift. Now, Annie passed away in 1962 during a church service after finishing her prayer. She is buried in Grove Island Cemetery in Teague, next to one of her 8 husbands. Another potential Wild West story. There are some stories from the Wild West that are hard to tell, and this is one of them. Elizabeth Ann Whitney, known as Miss Ann, moved to Central Texas to start a new life, answering the call to teach along the banks of the Leona River in what would become one of the first schools in Hamilton County. Well, there are no known photos of her, only the legacy she left behind. History says that in 1867, the small log cabin where she taught school was invaded by Comanche Indians. Arrows suddenly tore into the classroom, and in the chaos, Anne moved quickly, pushing students to safety, helping others escape through a window. As danger closed in, 2 children hid beneath loose floorboards. And in her final moments, she did something remarkable. She arranged her skirts to conceal the kids. Those children survived, and Ann Whitney was laid to rest in Graves Gentry Cemetery, where a marker still honors her courage. And today in Whitney, a school bears her name, ensuring her story, her sacrifice, and her heart for teaching are never forgotten. So a teacher, a protector, and a powerful legacy from the Wild West.
So what do you do when you are banned from running for governor in Texas? Well, you let your wife run instead. This morning's Weird Wild West story celebrates a bold chapter of women's history. So did you know the first woman to become governor in the state of Texas is from our area here in Bell County? We'll meet Miriam Ma Ferguson. Not only was she born in Bell County, she studied at Salado College and later at Baylor Female College, which is now the University of Mary Hardin Baylor. But her rise to power came with a Texas-sized twist. Her husband, former Governor James Pa Ferguson, get it, Ma and Pa? Well, he had been impeached partially due to the chicken salad case, and he was banned from holding office again. So Ma Ferguson came up with a plan to campaign under the famous slogan, 2 governors for the price of 1. And another one that voters just couldn't get enough of was me for Ma, and I ain't got a darned thing against Pa. Well, what this meant was elect Ma and Pa will still run the show behind the scenes. So in 1924, Miriam Ma Ferguson won the governor's race, becoming the first female governor of Texas. Now, while in office, she issued hundreds of pardons, battled political rivals, and kept Texas politics lively. And 100 years later, her Central Texas roots and those unforgettable slogans still stand out in Texas history. And as far as the chicken salad case that I mentioned, well, we'll dive more into that tomorrow on the Weird Wild West. Now, if you do want to hear more stories like this and much more, well, be sure to follow us on social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok.
Would you believe a Texas governor who was impeached and his wife who ran for office once lived in this historic temple home, and the Ku Klux Klan once threw bricks through the window. Well, yeah, it happened here, and this home belonged to Jim and Ma Ferguson. They built this home in 1907, but they ended up leaving in 1932 after the Ku Klux Klan made their way through town.
Long before the big white wedding dress became popular, some Central Texas brides walked down the aisle wearing black. At the Coryell Museum and Historical Center, there is a black wedding dress on display that belonged to a woman named Alwine Middleslet. She wore it when she got married in 1896 in Prussia before moving here to Central Texas. So the couple settled in Coryell County, and today wearing a black wedding dress, it might raise a few eyebrows, but for many families, black wedding dresses actually carry deep meaning. The color symbolized the hardships and challenges a couple might face during marriage. So basically, it was less fairy tale romance and more we're in this together no matter what. There was also a practical reason. Back then, many brides simply wore the nicest dress they owned, and black dresses were easier to wear again for church, funerals, or special occasions. So some people later believed black wedding dresses were bad luck, and over time, wedding traditions changed. So the black dresses became blue, some gray, and eventually transformed into the white gowns we know today. So while modern brides are busy saying yes to the dress, in the Old West, Central Texas brides were saying yes to black. And no, Lindsay and I did not wear black today because of this story. It just happened that way. We're not going to a Wild West wedding.
I know, or a funeral. It looks like we are, though.
Yeah.
One lonely grave is all that remains of a tragic mystery from the 1800s. Along Donahue Road sits the grave of Sarah Herndon, surrounded by an iron fence and standing alone in what used to be the thriving community of Donahue. Well, more than 160 years later, people still talk about her. So back in 1863, Sarah was 63 years old and decided to walk to a neighbor's house for an afternoon of knitting, but she never made it to her destination.
She lived up in Donahue. She came down off the hill, down into the valley, and she tried to cross the creek down there. And she got trapped in quicksand and died. And for whatever reason, they went ahead and buried her right there. And they had people looking for her for a couple of days, and they finally found her body had rose back up. They wound up burying her down there. And these single graves often get neglected. In fact, that one was severely neglected and ignored. And a lovely couple, I don't remember their names right now, I think you guys did a news article on it, actually went and purchased a replica stone. A young couple, and they replaced it on their own. I had contacted them and thanked them, but those are the things that really kind of tug at your heartstrings. Like, oh, somebody cares, how nice. Because at the commission, if I want the stone, I've got to go through all the rigmarole and everything. If somebody just said, we're not playing this game, they did it on their own. If all you got to do is drive around, and in that area, especially in that Czechoslovakian area, you're going to find a lot of single graves. There's a lot of them. There's quite a few in Temple, the mystery abounds.
And while the town of Donahue slowly disappeared into Central Texas history, Sarah's grave remained. But here's where the story gets eerie. Fresh flowers still appear at the grave, the weeds stay trimmed, the fence gets repaired, but nobody seems to know who has been caring for it after all of these years. So today, there's almost nothing left of Donahue, but Sarah Herndon's story, well, that never disappeared.
History often remembers the biggest names, but as we've seen today, some of the most fascinating stories belong to women whose legacies have quietly endured for generations. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Central Texas history and the extraordinary women who made it unforgettable. I'm Jasmine Caldwell. Thanks for watching.